The Monash graduation address gives us now the opportunity to hear from a very distinguished member of our alumni community, and we are privileged that Tabitha Lovett will today give this address. Ms Lovett is a very highly experienced manager and trustee, representative of some of Australia's most established and prestigious charitable trusts. Formerly with Equity Trustees, Ms Lovett is now the Chief Executive Officer of the Beeson Family Foundation, which awards grants to and supports projects that address disadvantage and inequity, encourage social inclusion and community connection, and which are highly innovative and transformative. Ms Lovett has a wide range of portfolio obligations, but high amongst those are including the responsible management with an investing lens and a commitment to companies and funds with a positive environmental and social impact. Her skills and experience cover all elements of the philanthropic sector, including relevant law, governance, regulatory framework, taxation, investment, reporting, and the many other requirements of government and agencies. And just an insight into her background, she was a Monash graduate, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Laws, postgraduate diplomas in legal practice, skills and ethics, was a Churchill Fellowship Award winner and studied in the United States on legal services for charities in the non-profit sector, and currently is completing a Masters of Social Investment and Philanthropic Issues. Ladies and gentlemen, graduates, we're delighted to welcome and to ask Ms Tabitha Lovett to give the graduation address.
Thank you very much. The only thing I had to remember was left or right, and I still had to ask for directions. May I first pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nations, their elders past, present and emerging, on whose land we're gathered today. Deputy Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, thank you for the invitation to speak to the graduating students of 2021. It's a great honour to address a group who, despite the significant disruptions and uncertainties of the last 2 years, have completed your degrees and diplomas. For you to get to this point today must have taken an enormous amount of discipline and resilience. And those two attributes, discipline and resilience, will hold you in good stead as you head into the next lap of your journey. Yesterday I asked my 8-year-old daughter if I could read this speech to her for practice. Halfway through, she said, "Mum, what are you trying to say?" I replied, "I want to congratulate the graduates on their achievement and encourage them to use their education and their determination and their resilience to be part of a positive change in the world." She nodded and then asked if she could be excused. Hopefully my message will resonate more for you. As you head into your careers, many of you will continue to be involved in professions associated with your degrees. Some of you will use your learnings to pursue other disciplines. But regardless of where you are in your careers, in 5, 10 or 20 years' time, you should feel confident that you are well prepared for life and the opportunities you have before you. You are part of a community that is rapidly changing through science, technology, the speed of communication, diversity of opportunity, and of course, an acute awareness and concern about the environment and the impact that we're having on the climate. Being part of a positive change and giving back to the community is a rewarding experience, and it transforms the giver as much as the recipient. In an article I read the other day, the act of giving back was actually described as a well-being tool. And although giving back shouldn't be motivated by personal gain, I can say from my own experience that striving to make a positive difference and to help others is genuinely satisfying. The other great benefit of looking for ways to be part of a positive change is that it builds your belief in your own ability to influence outcomes. A recent study which was conducted during the pandemic found that self-efficacy, the belief that you have the ability to influence things, contributes to resilience and good health. The study involved people who were affected by negative memory. Half of the study group were asked to recall a beautiful experience to combat that negative memory. The other half were asked to remember an event where they had exhibited self-efficacy, such as passing an exam, completing a degree, or helping someone. And it was the group who recalled their own self-efficacy who found it easier to perceive the negative experience in a new light and to view it as less distressing. So that means in the future, when you find yourself faced by a challenge, whether it's personal or at work, you can recall this experience of finishing your studies during a pandemic, and you should know that you can do anything. The second message I wanted to leave you with today is that although individuals can achieve great things, usually it is teams of people who achieve a lot more, whether that's at home, in the workplace, educational institutions, laboratories, in sport, pretty much for any undertaking. When I was studying arts law, there were times I wanted to give it up. And my mother kept saying to me, but once you have a university degree, no one can take that away from you. And that's true for all of you too. But even greater than this achievement is how you'll now use that education and put it into practice. For each of you, there'll be a team of people who helped you get here today. Whether that's your parents, your friends, your mentors, your university lecturers. So don't forget to thank them. My third message is about the importance of friendships that you've formed during your time here at Monash. The last 18 months of lockdown here in Victoria has really taught us how much we rely on contact with others to provide momentum and meaning and balance in life. And the friendships you've formed at Monash, both here on campus, and unfortunately for the last 18 months, probably mostly online, they can be lifelong, and they can help you in good and challenging times. So don't forget to nurture and maintain your friendships. My closest friends, almost 25 years after my graduation here, are still those I met at Monash. One of them with whom I finished law, and now he works as general counsel in Hong Kong, is still the person I turn to for advice on career options and personal decisions. He was then, and he is still today, ridiculously clever and very grounded. And on the evening before my last law exam, which was administrative law, I went into a bit of a panic, sort of a spiral, and I said, I think I'm going to drop out. And it was the night before the exam. I'd got myself into that state of anxiety where I couldn't see a path forward. It just felt like the best thing to do was to accept defeat and to run. And he could see that my brain was freezing, and he said some words of inspiration to me that I'll never forget. He said, you can't drop out the evening before the exam. And when I said, why? He said, it's too late to get a refund on your fees. And he said, your HECS debt is already huge. So you can see at that point, I was thinking more about myself than what good I could do with my education and what I could do with a career and how I could help others. And I've learned since then that if you ever get into those moments where you feel panicked or anxious, often the act of thinking about how you can help others is what will help you actually move through it. So that brings me to my next message, the importance of job satisfaction and helping others. I started my career as a solicitor at the law firm Mallisons, now known as Kingswood and Mallisons. I worked on a very large international construction arbitration for 3 years, which was interesting and complex, but it was very contentious. The two parties couldn't agree on anything until they both agreed they were tired of paying lawyers' fees. And so then they started to try and negotiate an out-of-court settlement. And that gave me the opportunity to ask to go on secondment to the Public Interest Law Clearinghouse, which is now called Justice Connect. If you don't know it, Justice Connect coordinates teams of barristers and solicitors and other professionals to run matters pro bono, which are considered in the public interest. A number of the social justice projects that were funded were by charitable trusts, and most of the conversations that I had with those trustees I found the most interesting because it was the idea of what could you do with philanthropy, what could you achieve with grants. And it ultimately inspired me to move into the philanthropy sector after about 4 years of practicing as a social justice public interest lawyer. When we talk about philanthropy, you often hear, and particularly in the media, a lot of discussion about the award of enormous gifts, and there's publicity attached to that. But we really talk about philanthropy as being more than just the act of giving money or treasure. It's also about giving your time and your talent, and also your heart. My first role was heading up the philanthropy department at a trustee company, Equity Trustees. We managed over 450 trusts, and each year they would distribute over $80 million in income to causes that were vast: education, food security, First Nations justice, health and welfare, medical research, the arts, children's welfare, the list goes on. Today, I am the CEO of the Beeson Family Foundation, and the Beesons are ambassadors of this university. My role involves researching and recommending projects which we think will make a positive change and tackle disadvantage and inequity, and the family also supports arts and culture. I love the variety of philanthropy, and so the fourth point I'm making is to encourage you too to find employment that challenges your curiosity and which you enjoy. Today, philanthropy is a thriving and growing sector. Australia is a relatively generous nation. We rank 4th on the Giving Index across the world, but with the impact of COVID-19, individual giving has gone down in the last 2 years. Although interestingly, corporate giving has gone up. They say by about 17%. Now this is in part because companies understand the role they need to play in Australia's economic recovery, but it's also attributed to the fact that companies know that to attract and retain talent, and when I say talent, I'm looking at all of you, they need to give you opportunities to be proud of the organisation or company that you work for, to see them demonstrate that they're good corporate citizens, and to give you opportunities to volunteer and be part of workplace giving. So don't underestimate your influence when you go into your workplace to not only shape where that fund and that support is going, but to get involved. In the next decade, we're going to see an unprecedented intergenerational wealth transition. It's estimated that $2.6 trillion in personal wealth will be transferred just in Australia from one generation to the next by 2035. I'm on the board of Philanthropy Australia, and we've recently launched a campaign to double structured giving in Australia by 2030. That would mean an increase from 2.5 billion to 5 billion. If a percentage of that wealth transition that I mentioned, 2.6 trillion, in the next decade is also distributed to charities such as universities, alongside family descendants, it will achieve great things, as well as help to balance the growing wealth disparity in society. And that benefits us all as a community, because a community that's underpinned by equitable access to education, health, and opportunity is better for everyone. And also because we achieve amazing things through philanthropy. I'm just going to touch on a couple of examples. Medical research. The vaccinations that allowed us to gather here today in person started with that research. Philanthropists have established Climate Works, based here at Monash University, and that same group of trusts and foundations recently established a research centre in Canberra called Water Trust, which is going to work with all of the stakeholders involved in water management, politicians, conservationists, farmers, policymakers, to try and work out a better way of managing water across Australia. A group of foundations that I worked with scoped and put forward the material which led to the Australian government introducing the Working with Children legislation. It makes background checks compulsory for people who are working with children to keep them safe from abuse and harm. And you know that even the rivets on the side of the freeways that let you know when you've veered off course or possibly fallen asleep at the wheel was first funded and trialled by philanthropy and is now used across the world. So climate change, water, road safety, children's safety, these issues are significant and they do affect us all. I mentioned earlier that I feel fortunate to have a career I enjoy and which I find meaningful. My choice of the word fortunate over lucky was deliberate. My Aunt Lily Brett is a writer who writes from the perspective of being the daughter of Holocaust survivors. And when I told her that I felt very lucky to have a job that I enjoyed, she said, I find it really frustrating when people cite luck for their careers. She said, you should be sharing, particularly as a woman, what you did to achieve your success, how hard you worked for your achievements, because saying that it was luck doesn't help the next generation. It's difficult to replicate luck, but you can replicate strategy and you can share what's worked and what hasn't worked. So what I'm saying is be proud of what you've achieved, but also share your experience and the strategies and the steps that you've taken with those who ask you for your advice. In deciding what to talk to you about today, I did consult with a few people whose opinion I value. The first, my mentor said, make sure you number the pages on your speech in case you drop it from shaking hands. One of my work colleagues said even more reassuringly, don't worry, no one will remember anything you say anyway. What do you remember about the keynote speech made at your ceremony? Fortunately, the very helpful friend who I mentioned from Hong Kong, who's here in the audience, because he's flown all the way here to make sure that I turned up to give the speech and didn't go off in a panic, he said, why don't you reflect, or ask the graduates to reflect, on how many people must have sat where you're sitting now before you. And it is interesting to stop and think about who came before you. In my time at Monash, the university seems to have produced a lot of politicians. Josh Frydenberg, Federal Treasurer, studied law in my year. Bill Shorten was the year above. Dan Andrews was in the year below me studying arts. But outside of politics, there have been extraordinary contributions made by graduates of Monash. Great thinkers and artists and scientists and philosophers like Peter Singer and Ben Quilty and Nick Cave. Equally, sitting in your seats were people whose names we might not recognise, but who enriched lives away from the spotlight. We're all part of a bigger story, and we're all part of a bigger picture. And when I sat where you're sitting now, I couldn't see my future clearly. I certainly didn't think I'd be here, getting to speak to you today. But looking at all of you now, I can see things more clearly. I can see your intelligence, I see possibility, I see responsibility, and I see hope. And I encourage you to enjoy thinking about the road ahead of you and the value of your resilience, what teams can achieve over individuals, friendships for life, job satisfaction, and importantly, giving back to the community that has so far given you a lot of opportunities. So I wish you the greatest good fortune, happiness, and health on your life's journey. And importantly, when and if ever you feel lost or struggling, don't forget how strong you've been in the last 18 months to finish your studies during a pandemic. And never be afraid to reach out for help. Thank you for listening.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity on behalf of all of you and all of us on stage to thank Tabitha for that address. It was clearly original, well written from the heart, and opened up real insights for each of you and for everyone the work, the passion, the focus. And I loved the analogy of how many people, and I said at the outset that this is the 1226th graduation ceremony of Monash University, including our overseas campuses. So to take that figure by approximately 350 per attendees per ceremony, and sometimes a lot more, gives you an idea of the number of our graduates and what's gone before you. But Tabitha, that was really interesting. I found it quite inspiring, and you've got an incredible life to date and a life ahead, and thank you. I'm glad you listened to your mother, you listened to your wise friend in Hong Kong, who I look forward to meeting, and thank you very much for the effort you put into that today as a graduation address. I'm sure you've inspired many.